Good afternoon, and your name is?
George LaTorre Jr.
George LaTorre Jr. How nice. And let's talk about your father. Tell us about your dad.
My memory of my father was that he was a well-respected person in the community, a very hard-working man, a man whose word was his contract. A self-made man, so to speak. My understanding was that he had a 6th grade education. He and his parents and family immigrated from Mexico when the railroad activity was taking place, and also the revolution in Mexico. And they originally came in to Arizona and eventually found their way to Wilmington after some stops along the way. And he left school when his brother-in-law, one of his brother-in-laws, passed away at a young age and had 5 children. So he dropped out of school to help support his sister's family and became sort of the father to the remaining children. And eventually the oldest son, Albert Guerrero, and he became partners in business. And he was the one that always found Albert a job to begin with. And I think Albert had an 8th grade education, so he was the more educated person. But he worked at the shipyards during the war, and eventually started to work at a fish cannery on Terminal Island called Terminal Island Seafoods. And eventually both he and Albert started a small trucking company called Guerrero and LaTorre Trucking. That was their first venture into the business world, and started hauling for the particular cannery that they worked for. They would have a driver or two, and they bought some trucks, and they were doing their hauling. My dad worked himself up to the position warehouse foreman, and Albert was a mechanic in the canning department. And through that experience, they decided after World War II to go into their own business by starting an inland fish cannery and building the building themselves. So they bought a small piece of land on Colin Street in Wilmington. And as a young boy, I can remember they're actually digging the ditches for the foundations and mixing the concrete and beginning to build the building. And I can recall handing up some of the 1x6s that they would use for the roofing and things like that. And that was the beginning. It was only about maybe a 4,000-foot building, but it was an attempt to begin to start a canning industry away from the waterfront, where the canneries had all been located up to that point in time, and all the big canneries were there. And there were many more than eventually settled, which ended up being virtually Chicken of the Sea and Starkist were the main ones. But my dad and Albert's business started a small trend that at that time, within, I believe, a 2-year period, there were 5 inland canneries within a 2-block radius. And it was a tough business being a small cannery, and unfortunately they all went by the wayside, and our company was the only one to survive.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Were were there any other, how many Mexicans were there that were able to own a business at that time, or your
I don't
father?
believe that any of the other owners were Mexican.
So was that unusual or difficult?
I can't say anything in that regard as to whether it was more difficult because you were a Mexican. One thing that made it easier is that you were able to hire from the local community, and to begin with, a lot of it was primarily relatives because it was a very small operation. They would do things like fillet of mackerel and then a little bit of sardines before they went by the wayside, mackerel, squid, and eventually we got into canning for sport fishermen. Your husband could go out on a boat, whether it be anywhere from San Diego to Santa Barbara, and catch a tuna or something of that sort, yellowtail, sea bass, and take it into the local fish market at the particular landing that they went out of, and we had a canning service right there where they could exchange for canned goods and take canned tuna home rather than stinky fish. And most of the wives kind of like that.
I did.
Yeah. So we ran that for several years, and I was in charge of that. And like I say, we ran it from San Diego all the way to Santa Barbara, and we would just make pickups and bring the fish in and can it here in Wilmington. But as that industry began to fade, as far as the availability of fish, we began to get into the Mexican food, the canned menudo. And the canned menudo was probably a product before its time because Mexican food had not yet become commercialized and available in the markets. This was before tortillas were sold in markets. This was before canned refried beans were sold in the market. So we're kind of one of the pioneers into the Mexican food category, but our presence wasn't a big smash to begin with. And it was 5 cases here, 10 cases there, and it was a very, very small, marginal business, and it was just a lark. Actually, the way we got into it was Albert's wife one day suggested to him, "Why don't you try canning menudo?" And he said, "Why not?" He said, "Make me a batch, and I'll take it to work on a Monday, and we'll put them in cans and see how they turn out." And so she did, and he did, and they tried it and ladled it out, and that was the very beginning, but it wasn't a very auspicious beginning because the quality of cans in those days emitted a lot of tin flavor. So the product did not come out like her product. And so, but we began fooling around with it, and little by little we adapted the formulation to overcome the inferior quality of the cans, and eventually began to market the product once we felt that we had something that was marketable. And like I say, we started 5 cases here, 10 cases here, primarily in the Los Angeles area. And
Sorry, can you add some years to this story too? What?
Okay, the company actually started in 1946, and
the canning,
the fish canning, the fish canning.
This is your father and your.
Yes, the actual fish canning. Okay. And in fact, a few years ago when we celebrated our 50th anniversary with a big party, I asked my partner Albert, I said, "When did you actually start?" He says, 1946. I know. I said, "But that was a whole year." I said, "Actually, what month or what day did you actually start? Did you make it a special occasion or something?" He says, "We were just glad to get started." So he says, "But I think it was in the fall." So eventually, when I changed the name of the company, I'm just jumping forward here a little bit, but when we changed the name of the company to coincide with our brand, Juanita's food products, we changed the name of the company to Juanita's Foods on September the 9th, 1986. And when we did that, I had the attorneys draw up all the papers and everything and made sure that we came across on that date, because that's the day that my daughter got married. And I wanted to make sure that somebody would recall when we changed the name of the company. So I hope it was September the 9th. I could possibly be wrong on that, but I know it was 1986. And so therefore we're able to at least ascertain that that was the date that we changed the name of the company to Juanita's Foods. But we actually started doing the menudo probably about 1950. And because it was, like I would say, a very slow start, and we were primarily just selling in the Los Angeles area. Digressing back just a little bit as far as history is concerned, or do you want me to continue?
Oh, no, you're fine.
Okay.
It's fine.
Just trying to keep things in perspective as far as the timetable is concerned. When my mother and father married, this was a mixed marriage, which was very, very uncommon at the time, 1934. And I know my mother's parents were against the wedding, so my parents eloped.
And mixed in what way? Race?
Well, my mother is Japanese.
Sorry.
I forgot to mention that. My mother's parents came from Japan. And
Was she born in Japan?
no, she was born here. After they were married, they came to the United States, and their 3 daughters were born here. And they had a little grocery store business on the corner of Watson and L Street in Wilmington.
What was their name?
Hamamoto. The little building is not there anymore, but the concrete slab that it occupied is still there. And the home that they had across the street is still there. But they had this little store, really a mom and pop grocery store, and my dad used to shop there. And so I guess nature took its course, and they fell in love, and they wanted to get married, and my grandparents on my mother's side were against it, so they ended up eloping in Mexico. And I understand that my grandparents weren't too happy about that, and so there was a lapse of time where my mother was kind of shut out from the family, and then I was born the following year, and naturally the grandparents wanted to have something to do with the grandchild, so they got back together again, and from then up, I guess it was okay.
So what year, what would that make your birth? 1935?
1935.
What month and day?
February the 21st. So, my dad, like I said, worked in the fish canneries, and he and Albert both had deferments from military service because of the fact that they were working in an important industry that needed to provide food for the service people. So they had deferments as far as not having to go into the Army or the service at that time. Going back a little bit, even before that, and I have a picture, like I said, that I'll donate to the Historical Society, that my dad used to have an orchestra. And he has a picture, well, they took a picture in front of the old Banning Park gym. And it's called George LaTorre and his orchestra. And they must have been about, I don't know, 14, 15 piece band. They had white tuxedos on, all of that, and played for local weddings and baptismals and whatever the occasions were. And that was a nice piece of history in my family.
Was before he was married?
Yes, and just after he was married too, they still had it. I don't know how much longer he kept it after I was born, but I know the date on the picture is 1935. And in fact, one of the guys that was in that orchestra played for the reception of my wedding.
Oh, how nice.
Yeah, he still had a little group at that time. What else?
Tell me a little
My dad used to play the guitar and the mandolin. And I guess he had a love for music, and he was self-taught. He had never taken any lessons because, you know, they couldn't take lessons in those days because they couldn't afford it. So for him to learn to play 2 instruments and then to actually have his own orchestra, I think was absolutely wonderful, considering that he had no formal background in music. So anyway, my dad also, during the early war years, started a semi-pro baseball team in an area of Wilmington called Tortilla Flats. And he actually...
Where was Tortilla Flats?
Tortilla Flats was the bridge, Pacific Coast Highway Bridge, just east of Banning Park. As you come down the bridge, it would be northeast of that, or northwest of the bridge. There's a big warehouse now that's there, occupies the spot. But it was a neat experience because he actually, I don't know if he got the land on some sort of a lease or what the arrangement was, because it was primarily oil area. But he actually built the bleachers and the dugouts and all of that, and there was no grass because they couldn't maintain grass. It was all dirt. And I can recall as a young boy that he would take me after church and we'd go out early to the ballpark every Sunday for 11 years. And we would drag the field, water the field, hand water the field, line the field. And all this time, he had a loudspeaker and he'd play music on the records, the old LP records, to draw interest to the fact that there's going to be a ball game. And this was before television. So there wasn't really a whole lot for people to do on a Sunday afternoon except go to the park or to the beach or something, you know. Yeah, but this baseball took place all year long, so it was something that the community could do any Sunday that they wanted to do it. And it was kind of a neat activity, and a lot of good ball players came out of that place. But he'd play the music, and then the games, I think, would be around 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Did you say your mother made the sandwiches?
Yeah. My mother used to buy loaves of bread and spread them out on the kitchen table and make bologna sandwiches or ham and cheese sandwiches or that type of thing, and wrap them up in wax paper in those days. And we would take them to the ball game and sell them at the concession stand with soda pop and bottles of beer and what have you. And so it was a way of self-sustaining the expenses that we needed to take care of. And it was a neat activity. A lot of the community would come out and sit in the bleachers and park cars nearby up on a hill, and it was just a great place for a Sunday afternoon for the people that liked baseball, and they would come out. During World War II, we all know that they took all the Japanese people, Japanese ancestry, to internment camps. When they were doing this, my mother's family were all removed from the area. And my mother, and I guess I, were supposed to go. And my father, after he passed away and going through some of his things, I had found letters that he had written to a few people that were of influence to see if he could get an exemption for my mother and myself to stay. And he was denied. So my father had relatives from his side of the family that lived in Los Angeles. So when the roundup was taking place for the Japanese people, he took my mother and I, this sounds like a mystery novel, but he took us in the dead of night to his relations in Los Angeles, and we stayed there for a period of time. I can't recall how long it was because I was a young, 6 years old at the time, 5 years old. And but I just remember that we went over there, and my mother had to stay inside the house virtually all during the daylight hours and could not go out into the public areas. And it must have been for maybe a month or two. And then he went and picked us up in the evening time and brought us back home. And I went back to school and had no problems because my last name was LaTorre. And my mother was virtually a house prisoner for the duration of the war. And her family was located in Lone Pine, California. So she could not communicate with them because she could not let them know that she was still here. I mean, they knew that she was here, but they just had no communication during the course of the war. But my parents were well liked and well respected in the area, so just about everybody on our block knew that she was there, but she still could not go out into the public areas. She had a lady friend down the block that did hair, so once in a while in the evening after it was dark, she'd put a bandana on and she'd walk down and the lady would do her hair. When she needed groceries, we had a little mom and pop grocery store down the street. She'd make a list and I'd go pick them up, and we had an account there in those days. And I remember, to pass the time, she would listen to the radio because we had no television in those days, and she would listen to baseball games during baseball season, and she would keep score. My dad always had to buy her a score pad because she would run out. But that was her way of passing some time, is that she'd listen to the game and she'd just keep her score, ball one, strike one, one out, flight out, whatever it might be. And she would just listen to the game and do that. And she did a lot of knitting and crocheting and that type of things. And she still does that to this day. And has won, she used to live out in Palmdale for a while and recently moved back, but she won all sorts of county fair awards for her work that she would enter in some of the fairs, lots of blue ribbons and things like that. And but when I was 14, my only sister from that marriage was born. And then unfortunately that same year my parents split up and divorced. My dad remarried, had 3 other children, 2 boys, 1 boy and 2 girls. And then my dad had a heart attack in 1967. And so I had to start running the business. And I knew how to run the business at the time, but he was still the boss.
I still had a couple of questions, and I was so blown away. I had no idea the internment camp. I knew about it, but I've never talked to anyone. What did they explain to you as a kid? How did they pulled you out of school?
Mm-hmm.
And so what did they say? What did your parents say to you?
At the time, they just said, we're going to go visit relatives in Los Angeles for a little while. And then when I got when I was brought back home, it was explained to me what had happened in simple terms. And it was just, you know, I just accepted it. I said, you know, because you don't really understand that much when you're only 5, 6 years old. And you just, you know, you just figure, well, okay, you know, my cousins are gone, and my grandparents are gone, and my aunts are gone, my uncles are gone, and we'll see them after the war, whenever that would be.
And then with your mom always staying inside, did that just become normal?
It became a normal way of life.
You didn't question it too much?
No, I understood it, I guess, that part. And once in a while, we'd go to a movie during the week at night. We would just drive to some movie someplace and go in to maybe a 8 o'clock show or something like that during the week when there wasn't very many people. And she'd always wear sunglasses and a bandana, and never had any problems. But it was just a very quiet way of life for that period, because, you know, you couldn't go visit relatives, or she couldn't, and so we'd have a few people over now and then, that type of thing. But for her to be able to go out, like, that's why she didn't go to the ball games, because she couldn't. And it was just a tough time for her at that. But I mean, I guess she made the best of it. My mother's typical Japanese, quiet, reserved, doesn't make waves. When I asked her, when I knew that you had invited me to do this video, we had her over for Easter, and I said, Mom, I've been invited to do a video, and part of it would be some of your experiences. And she says, no, I don't want to do any of that stuff. She thought she was going to have to do it. And I said, no, I'll be the one to do it if you have no objection. And she says, well, as long as I don't have to do any of that, you know, that's okay. But I think it's an important part of my life, and something that's important as far as the history of this country that should never have taken place, but it did, and a lot of other Japanese people were hurt by it, by having to leave their belongings behind and losing their property and what have you.
Did your grandparents lose their property there then too?
I don't remember if they lost it or if they sold it at a high discount or what, but when the war was over, one of the aunts moved to Salt Lake City, and one of them moved to Denver. I don't remember what my uncles did for a living, and I remember that my mother and I took a train ride to go visit them, and that was the first time I'd ever ridden a train besides the red cars. And it was a long journey, I recall, and my first time I was really exposed to snow because it was in the wintertime. And then eventually they both came back and got into the poultry business. One aunt and uncle got into the wholesale business, and one of them got into the retail business. And in fact, my mother worked for her sister that got into the wholesale business for several years. And in fact, she's now living with that sister, where my aunt lives in Paramount. She had 2 homes on one lot, so she had an empty house, and she said, why don't you come and live with me here, and this way we can keep each other company. So we're very happy that she did it, because she was living in Pond. My mother had remarried several years later, and her husband worked for Lockheed. And when he got transferred to Palmdale, they moved to Palmdale. And so she lived out there for many, many years. And then he passed away from a heart attack. And she stayed on living there because she had friends and she liked the quiet pace of life out there. But my mother's 85 now, and she felt that perhaps this was a good time to get back to some family to where she can be with somebody closer, and she's not that far from us.
Now, did you go directly into the business, or did you go after high school? What did you do after high school?
After high school, I went to Harbor College for a year, played a little baseball, had the crazy notion that maybe I wanted to play professional baseball. Two buddies and I transferred to Fresno State College, which had an outstanding baseball coach. And I was fortunate enough to make the varsity team and play regularly there, and we did real well. We won our college or our league championship that year and got in the regional playoffs. But after that 1 year, I decided that I probably didn't have the skills to really get all the way to the major leagues, and rather than spend the time kicking around the minors, I was more of a serious guy, I guess, and I thought, well, I might as well get on with whatever I'm going to do in life and try to make my own niche. But from there, I transferred to Long Beach State and didn't really know for sure what I wanted to do with myself or my occupation in life, because my father's business at the time really wasn't much of a business. It was just a lot of work and not really what you call successful. And
Now, this is the early 50s.
this was around 54, thereabouts. And the Korean War had just ended a year or so before then. There was still the GI Bill that was available if you went into the service prior to the end of January in 55. But mandatory service requirement was still required of all the guys. So I decided to give myself a couple of years thinking time and get my military service obligation out of the way and qualify for the GI Bill, because I knew that my dad couldn't afford to put me through school. So I went in, did my service hitch, did 2 tough years in Hawaii, and came home. While I was in Hawaii, an incident happened which made me realize that I really wanted to be in my own business if I possibly could. And the best opportunity for that would have been my father's business. So when I came back, I had lunch with my dad, told him I'd like to join the family business, and he was happy to hear that. So I started to work for him, went back to college at Long Beach State.
Did you want to talk about what that incident was? No. Oh, sorry. I didn't know the interview.
It was
Okay, never mind.
it was incidental, but the main thing is that
Something.
it happened, and it gave me a sense of direction of what I wanted to do in my life. It was the turning point, and you know, you never know when a negative is going to turn into a positive. And that's one of the things that I've always tried to practice in my business, is that if a negative happens, let's turn it into a positive. And at least learn by it so that you don't do it again, and maybe avoid yourself a major disaster. So, played a little baseball while I was in college there at Long Beach State, had a real good time. During that time, I met my wife.
Is she from Wilmington?
She was originally from Wilmington. Her maiden name was Lydia Fernandez. Her father came from Mexico, and he was a longshoreman. And she ended up living in San Pedro. And we happened to meet at a wedding reception dance at a hall in San Pedro. And it was just a coincidence, because a friend of mine and I were both single, and we said Saturday night, and what should we do? And I said, well, I hear there's a wedding reception in San Pedro. Why don't we go crash it? So at the, I'm not sure what it's referred to now. It used to be called the Yugoslav Hall.
Yeah, Dalmatian. Yeah.
Dalmatian?
now.
Dalmatian? Okay. So we go over there, and it's in the evening, music is playing, we're looking to dance. I'm looking across the hall to see who I can dance with, and I spot this pretty girl in a green dress and long black hair. I go up and ask her to dance, and I spent the rest of the night with her dancing and having a good time, and eventually we got married. So it was...
And she never asked you who you knew at the wedding? The bride or the groom?
I don't think she did.
Lucky.
In fact, I should ask her sometime, now that you mention it, who she knew.
Ooh.
Yeah, maybe she was crashing it too. Could be. But that was 41 years ago, and we'll be celebrating our 42nd anniversary come this July.
I have to ask, July what?
26.
Ours is July 6th.
See, I remembered that one. Yeah.
We've been married the same year.
Oh.
And we have 3 children.
So,
Gina, whose name is Georgina, and Mark, and Aaron. And Mark is 2 years younger than Gina, and Aaron is 10 years younger than his brother Mark. And I'm pleased to say that all 3 are in my business, and they're there because they want to be. I can recall as a young boy when I was a teenager in high school and I wanted to go out and work summers with my buddies wherever they were going to be. My dad used to say, "You want to work, son? You come to the plant." And I remember I used to paint every piece of metal that we had in the plant, because in those days we just had iron and it would rust. So I had to scrape, brush, primer, and paint every piece of metal every summer until we began to come out with stainless steel equipment. So to this day, painting is not one of my favorite activities. But it was a learning experience. But the one thing I always practiced, I made up my mind to practice with my kids, that when they became of working age, that they had to learn the value of a dollar and begin to work. And I offered them the opportunity to work in the plant if they wanted to. If not, wherever they wanted to go was fine with me, because I never wanted them to feel that I pressured them into coming to work at the company. And the company at that time, we were just beginning to show some progress, and but we weren't what you call a successful company. And so therefore, there was a lot of work to be done. And I worked a lot of hours in those days, and during the days when we packed tuna for sport fishermen, there would be weeks go by where I wouldn't get a day off during the summer, or I'd be on 24-hour call. I mean, we could be out for dinner someplace on a Saturday night, and I'd get a call and have to go to work.
You had ongoing. Were you canning fish still, or did you?
At that time, we still were. See, this was still in the 60s.
Oh, okay.
We got out when my dad died in 1968, in January of 1968. His partner asked me to take his place in the business as far as running the business, because my dad's partner, his nephew, was the mechanical end of the business, and he didn't know anything about business. He didn't know a debit from a credit, but he could run the plant. And I said, fine. I said, we'll do it on one condition, that we get out of the fish business. And he says, well, what are we going to do? And I says, well, we're going to do menudo.
Because you had started.
Because we had started that, and it was very small at the time. But he says, well, we can't make a living canning that. And I said, I don't know if you've noticed, Albert, but we're not making very much of a living right now. And I mean, if you were to average out our wages by the hours that we put in, it was probably less than what we were paying our help by the hour. So he says, whatever you want, we'll try it.
Now, you had said earlier that it wasn't a very big product. It wasn't a very popular product.
Right.
Now, why was that? Do I know menudo?
Well,
Pretty popular.
because
What was the community? What was the?
because the resistance and there still is to people that have never tried canned menudo to this day. It's canned menudo. Canned menudo can't possibly be any good. So we did a lot of in-store demos, demonstrations, sampling, in order to get people to try the product. So eventually that's how we began to build our business. We did a lot of in-store demos. And we would do picnics and community fairs and things like that just to get the exposure of people to try the product.
Now, when did you move on to other products?
Let's see, we got out of the fish business took us a year, so actually it wasn't until '69. And we didn't come out with any more products for maybe a dozen years or so, because what we did is that we came out with different sizes of menudo. We originally had a 15-ounce size can, which was a single serving can. And then we came out with a 29-ounce can, which was considered enough for 2 people. And I remember I wanted to come out with a 7-ounce buffet pull-top can for the catering truck trade, because I figured it'd be great for the catering truck to go out and service the working guys. And my dad said, "It'll never fly." He says, "It's too small. If a Mexican wants to eat some menudo, he wants a big serving." And I said, "Well, then he can buy 2 cans." But they needed to have the pull-top feature in those days, and those little hot trucks that used to run around, not what they have today, but the old ones, they used to carry a lot of canned goods and chili and things like that. And they always wanted these pull tops because it was easy to serve. And they got a premium for them anyway, so it didn't matter on price. So my dad wouldn't let me do that. But after he passed away, the next year I came out with that size, and it was very successful. Eventually that kind of business kind of tapered off because these big hot serve trucks started going to where they serve a lot of products that they make or in bulk stuff. So then they started buying our number 10 size can, and then they could just keep it in their pots and just ladle out a serving to somebody, and it gave the appearance of more homemade. But so we had 4 can sizes, and then probably, let's see, around 1984, somewhere in that neighborhood, we started coming out with a hot and spicy menudo. And we were told, well, it's just going to cannibalize your sales. And I said, yeah, but it'll give us more shelf space. And so we did that, and that's turned out to be our number 2 bestseller. And then after that, a few years down the road, Mexican food became more popular in the retail grocery trade, and started to develop their own sections. And in fact, I believe we were one of the companies that, and by this time we had made a change to a very big food broker, one of the biggest food brokers in Southern California. And we got them to start promoting the Cinco de Mayo holiday among the Hispanic people, which the retailers had never done, so they could feature our products. And now it's that and September 16th, Mexican Independence Day, are 2 very big promotional calendar dates for the retail grocers to market Mexican food. But we eventually did that, and we came out with a Mexican meatball soup called albóndigas, and we came out with a pozole, which is pork, meat, and hominy in a chili broth. And then we started marketing our Mexican-style hominy, which we use in our menudo and pozole, because we had the equipment to produce this product, and I just felt there's got to be a lot of Hispanics that like to make their own homemade product that would like our style of hominy versus the normal southern style of hominy. And so we began to market that. And the primary size can that we use for that is number 10, the gallon size can. And you just never know how things are going to work out. Today it's the #1 selling canned hominy in the state of California. So we have two #1s, the menudo and the hominy.
We might have to wrap up for a break because I think that tape is about to stop.
Oh, okay.
Is that okay?
Sure, I could use.
There we go. Okay, I'm ready.
Okay, you were going to tell us about Maher House.
Maher House. Maher House, I can't overstate what an important part that played in my life, in my young life as a young teenager. Maher House was right across the street from Wilmington Park Grammar School, and it was an actual house from the Maher family that was donated for the use of the Catholic Youth Organization, the CYO. And its primary focus at that period of time was on providing activities for young people.
Now, was this the early 60s?
Yes. No. It's earlier than that. This had to have been in the late 40s.
The late 40s.
Yeah. And we had a director there by the name of Baker Quesada. And he was just wonderful with the young boys. And we played all the major sports. And he would provide transportation. And I remember the very first time I ever seen snow, because that was prior to my trip to visit my relatives after the war. He took us up to Big Bear, and we got to play in the snow and throw snowballs and what have you. And that was the first time we'd ever seen snow as young boys. But also during that era, during World War II, was an era called the Pachucos in Wilmington. And they were Hispanic young men who dressed a certain style with the baggy pants, and but not like what you see nowadays, more dressy baggy pants. But they were a gang, so to speak, and they controlled the east part of town. And our home, and that was on L Street, primarily between Sanford and Watson. And at Sanford was the Holy Family Church. And we lived right in the middle of the block almost. So my friends and I, we would walk back and forth. And during the weekends primarily, or just at night, they would actually have like 55-gallon drums at each end of the block, and they would burn wood, and they didn't allow outsiders to come in to the block. But they never bothered the young boys because they knew we were residents there. But had it not been for Maher House, I don't really know what would have happened to our group of young boys because of the influence of these guys. And not that they were all real bad or anything like that, but they were just a gang that controlled a certain part of town. And I can recall as a young boy, we lived right next door to a civic facility called the Norifica, and they would have a lot of community events there on weekends and things like that. And I can recall there being fights taking place in the street, in my front yard, in my backyard, in my driveway, and never heard of anybody getting real seriously hurt, but there were fights. And so getting back to Maher House, Baker and his group provided the guiding influence that I think helped us to overcome this outside influence by keeping us busy with sports, and was just the right guiding influence to keep us on the straight and narrow path. That's why to this day, since I was born and raised in Wilmington, anytime an organization that provides services to the youth needs some sort of a donation of any kind, I can hardly ever say no because of the fact that I know what it's like to get that help. And if we are able to provide that kind of assistance, we always try to do it. But I think everybody in town knows that now.
You have an X on your head, huh?
I think so. We're an easy mark. But it really did play an important part, and I know its operation has changed somewhat over the years, and they began catering to the seniors and different types of other programs, and I know that the focus from the higher authorities that control the activities there has changed, and I'd like to see it go back to taking care of the ones that really need it, which are the young people and the seniors. But you know, we'll see what happens in the future.
Can you remember what you felt like as a kid? How old were you, first of all, when you first went and started going there?
To Maher House?
Yeah.
I must have been about maybe 11.
And why did you go there first? What?
Because it was a place where you could have something to do after school, because at 11 I was still going to Wilmington Park Grammar School. So you just walk right across the street and join the guys playing basketball or touch football or throwing the ball a little bit, what have you. And from there I was only maybe 3 blocks to home. And it was just a natural place to go, because Banning Park, although it was open for kids in the community, it was you know, 45-minute walk. And even then it seemed to, at that time, cater more to the Anglo crowd, and the Hispanics, the Mexican people, primarily were starting to go to the Maher House because it was closer, and you know, you gravitate where things are easier to go to. But it just really served a good purpose in my life, and I know currently probably the closest thing to that is the Wilmington Teen Center, which is being run by Connie Calderon, and her brother Mike was one of the guys that I grew up with at going to Maher House, so she knows how important it is to run a good program, and she does that very well, and so we try to help her too.
Was there ever a time while you were there at the Maher House that you felt pulled towards the Pachuco or style, or?
No, it never really.
They got you at a good age?
I guess so. It never really appealed to me. And I guess because all of us young guys loved sports, so we were able to do that, where the Pachuco crowd didn't really push that kind of activity. They kind of hung around and stuff like that, where we could play sports all year round, and most of us ended up growing up and eventually going to Banning High School and playing sports there. Are we okay?
Yeah.
So there were a lot of, out of this crowd, there were a lot of guys that came out that were excellent athletes, and also became good citizens as adults.
You went to church then at Holy Family?
Yes, I was an altar boy at Holy Family until I got taller than the priest. And then I decided that maybe I should step aside and let somebody else do it. But I remember we used to have the old wooden church when I was a young boy there, and a priest came in by the name of Father Canseco during that time, and he wanted to build a new parish. And I remember my being called to a meeting at the parish because he was kind of gathering some of the leaders in the community. And he got them all to agree that a church was needed, and to help contribute financially to the beginning of developing a new church. And it's what's there now. So that was the beginning of that church. So,
Did you know Wilmington Park is the oldest school in Wilmington?
no, I really didn't.
The school itself was started in 1917, but that building was built in 1923.
Well, I know it's not big enough,
Oh,
but I remember as a student there having some good teachers, and in the 6th grade, when we were going to graduate, I was elected class president, and I had to give the farewell speech for my class, so to speak. And that was the kind of the beginning of I guess, maybe some of my leadership type roles that I've played through my life. I became very active in high school and was a member of a lot of clubs, and ended up being the president of a lot of clubs, and I was student body vice president during my senior year, and during like playing baseball and things like that, I captained 3 out of 4 teams that I played on, and it just kind of developed a little background for, I guess, what I would eventually do with my life, as far as kind of having to be in charge of some things and learning to accept that responsibility.
now the Granada Theater was at the time, at this period of time, wasn't it?
Also the Avalon.
Where was the Avalon?
The Avalon was the very next block north on, let's see, do you remember where Joe Desi's used to be?
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a little small coffee shop there or something. It was in that same set of buildings there, a smaller theater, but it was another theater that we had in town. And
Do you have any cross streets that you can?
cross streets, it would be between Avalon and G Street.
It was on Avalon and G.
It was on Avalon. Yeah, not on the corner, it was towards the middle of the block, but it was right there. So we had 2 theaters at one time.
Another question I have to ask is about the Dawn Hotel. This was the period of time when it was actually flourishing, wasn't it?
It was flourishing. I don't remember a whole lot about that, but I remember that it being a special place, and I used to be impressed by seeing the palm trees. I mean, you know, when you come from a place where you have no grass in your yard, anything that has some greenery attached to it, you're impressed by, and especially at a young age. And the old Catalina terminal, where the white steamer used to depart from. I remember there being a lot of activity there. And in fact, as you know, we've been trying for several years now to try to get Banning's Landing established there, and that's a whole nother story. But the impact, I think, of Wilmington is a different community than the one that I grew up in now.
How so?
I don't believe that it has the same as closeness of a community as it did have before, because of so many new people that have come into the community, the activity of the port that has taken place, and like everywhere else in the world, I guess now, with the presence of drugs and crime and what have you. Wilmington used to be such a wonderful, small, together, safe community. I remember as a kid, I used to walk from my home to the Granada Theater and not be afraid to walk home in the late afternoon or early evening, so that I wouldn't have to pay the nickel or dime for the bus, and I could buy a comic book or an ice cream or something, and it would take maybe another 30 minutes to walk home. But when you're with your buddies, you know, it doesn't make any difference. And it was just a very safe place, and then with, you know, my dad associated with the baseball park, and And then eventually he started the family business. Our family's kind of always been looked upon as a respected family in the community. And I will mention one thing. When we were beginning to outgrow our plant and decided that we had to get into another facility, the councilman that was in office at that time was John Gibson. Wonderful man. And his aide was John Mendez, longtime friend. And I happened to mention to him one time that we were thinking of leaving the community to move our business to someplace that was suitable for it. And they were just beginning to develop the Wilmington Industrial Park. And he said, well, why don't you stay here? We'll get you a spot here. And I said, well, see what you can do. In the meantime, I kept looking. And to make a long story short, he found me a spot and was very instrumental in clearing the hurdles for us to be able to get the piece of property that we needed. And we went ahead and built a building there. But without John's help and Councilman Gibson's help, we probably would have moved out of the community. And then Gibson's predecessor, Joan Flores, came in, and she was very helpful in helping us do an expansion that we did later on. And then we just recently completed another addition where we acquired the city block just to the south of us. And we really couldn't have done that without, again, the councilman, Rudy Zvornich's assistance in his office. Because it was very, very complicated. I won't go into the details on it, but it was a very complicated project, and it took us 5 years to do it. And that's sort of cemented us into staying in Wilmington, which we were glad to be able to do. And we've continued our growth. But when we were going to build the first building, I remember telling my partner, Albert, I said, I want to build a nice facility that we and the community can be proud of, because so many Mexican businesses at the time were thought of as working out of cubby holes, out of garages, side streets, and that type of thing. And I wanted something that we could show that you could be proud of, and the community could be proud of. And so we hired Frank Politeo as our architect, and he did a wonderful job of designing something for us. And we did above the minimum as far as landscaping requirements and this type of thing, so that we as a company showed pride in what we have, and we wanted the community to feel proud that we were there, and that just to show the people that this can be done. And we're very proud of what we've accomplished here. And we commonly call Wilmington is the manila capital of the world, because we sell more manila than anybody else, and so therefore Wilmington should have the title of the manila capital of the world besides the Port of Los Angeles. But what were some of the other things that you wanted me to cover?
Actually, do you have any other questions? I want to thank you very much for coming and being so patient with both of us here and everything that went on. Thank you so much.
It's been my pleasure.
I really appreciate it.